Hello, everyone. Just wanted to wish you guys a good night. Hope you guys are doing well. We're going to be reading from another book tonight, a chapter that is Other Losses, the telltale signs of what took place in Germany after the war, as General Eisenhower begins to use what we would call camps, the German soldiers, but in reality, it was a way of killing them. And very few people know this. There's people out there trying to tell you that the Jews are the ones who actually went through the Holocaust. When reality simply is, it was not them, folks. It was the Germans. It was the Germans who were dealt with in the wrong way, and our government was involved in it, enormously involved in it, and so was Russia, the Soviet Union at that time also. So let's go to the fourth chapter of Other Losses. And the title of the chapter is simply The Cruelty of the Victor. The spirit of Goethe, that is Goethe, a Holy Spirit keeps me alive. Anonymous prisoner. And we're going to at night, searchlights threw blinding light over the men lying in the shadowy holes. They watched uneasily the dark shadows standing high above them on the paths lit by the searchlights. Men shuffle along the slippery banks between the holes all night, lining up for water. Charles von Lütjenthal laid in his hole, curled up next to one of his brother officers, wondering if he could get himself released before he was shipped to France. Men cried out in their nightmare sleep. He resolved to try again with the guards the next day. I am half American, he thought, rehearsing his English. My mother's American. I gave myself up to you. I don't belong in here. I am half American. He had not been captured valid, but was convalescing at home when he decided to surrender voluntarily to the U.S. troops. This particular guy, von Littenchak, who survived 3 months at KRIP, K-R-I-P-P, later moved to Washington. He has written military history for the U.S. Army. About to occupy his house because otherwise he might be accused of plotting further underground resistance. We were kept in crowded barbed wire cages in the opening with scarcely any food, he has said at the camp at KRIP near Ramada on the Rhine. The latrines were just logs floating over ditches next to the barbed wire fence. To sleep, all we could do was to dig out a hole in the ground with our hands, then cling together in the hole. We were crowded very close together. Because of illness, the men had to defecate on the ground. Soon many of us were too weak to take off our trousers first, so our clothing was infected, and so was the mud where we had to walk and sit and lie down. There was no water at all at first, except the rain. Then after a couple of weeks, we could get a little water from a standpipe, but most of us had nothing to carry it in, so we could get only a few mouthfuls after hours of lining up, sometimes even throughout the night. We had to walk along between the holes on the soft earth thrown up by the digging, so it was easy to fall into a hole, but hard to climb out. The rain was almost constant along that part of the Rhine that spring. More than half the days we had rain. More than half the days we had no food at all. On the rest, we got a little K ration. I could see from the packages that they were giving up us 1/10 of the rations that they issued to their own men. So in the end, we got perhaps 5% of the normal U.S. Army ration. I complained to the American camp commander that he was breaking the Geneva Convention, but he said, "Forget the convention. You haven't any rights." Yeah. Well, in a few days, some of the men who had gone healthy into the camp were dead. I saw our men dragging many dead bodies to the gate of the camp, where they were thrown loose on top of each other onto trucks, which took them away. One 17-year-old boy who could see his village in the distance used to stand weeping near the barbed wire fence. One morning, the prisoners found him shot at the foot of the fence. His body was strung up and left hanging on the wire by the guards as a warning. The prisoners were forced to walk by the body. Many cried out, "Morto, morto," murder, murder, in retaliation. The camp commander withheld the prisoners' meager rations for 3 days. For us, who were already starving and could hardly move because of weakness, It was frightful. For many, it meant death. This was not the only time when the commander withheld rations to punish prisoners. And this is the United States, folks. You need to hear it. You need to hear it clear. You need to understand that our men did this to other men. And we did this also in Iraq. Okay? It's very cowardly to do an enemy like this, folks. Very cowardly. It speaks a lot about leadership in our army, our military. Private Hans T. had just turned 18 in hospital when the Americans walked into his ward on April 18th. All the patients were taken out to the camp at Bad Kreuznach. Hans was wearing only a pair of shorts, along with shoes and a shirt, when he was herded into Bad Kreuznach with several 100,000 others. The camp spread over a long field between a narrow country road and a line of low hills to the west. Here he was kept for weeks with no roof, almost no food, little water, no mail, and no sign of anyone else's knowledge of their solution. Because many of the men had been fleeing the Eastern Front. They were not in their original units, so few of the men knew any of the others. Americans were really shitty to us, said Heinz T. At the beginning, when there were still trees in the camp, some men managed to cut off some limbs to build a fire. The guards ordered them to put it out. In many of the cages. They were forbidden to dig holes in the ground for shelter. All we had to eat was grass, he remembered. Some of them climbed up the walnut tree when it came into leaf to get the leaves to smoke or to eat. Several times a small plane flew slowly overhead, turning constantly. The men realized they were being photographed for an American magazine or newspaper. His feet swelled up, so he took his shoes off. When the swelling had abated a little, he tried to get the shoes back on, but they still wouldn't fit in. So he tucked them under his head at night. Inside one of them, he put a small bag of the coffee, which had been given to the prisoners by the Americans. He thought, I'll take this coffee home with me when I go. He'd be so glad. One morning, he woke up to find both coffee and shoes gone. He wept. He was far from the youngest of the camp. Children as young as 6 years old, pregnant women, men over 60 were among the prisoners in these camps because no records were made in the DEF camps, and most of the POW records were destroyed in the 1950s. No one knows how many civilians were in prison, folks. No one. But French reports show that among about 100,000 people the Americans turned over to them, supposedly for labor, there were only 32,640 women, children, and old men. Lieutenant Colonel Valentin Barnes, making his report on Bad Kreuznach, noted on April 22nd that a female infant was born to a female prisoner of war in enclosed A3. George Weiss, a tank repairman, said his camp on the Rhine was so crowded that we couldn't even lie down properly. All night we had to sit up, jammed up against each other, but the lack of water was the worst thing of all. For 3.5 days, we had no water at all. We drink our own urine. It tasted terrible, but what could we do? So men got down on the ground and licked the ground to get some moisture. I was so weak, I was already on my knees when finally we got a little water to drink. I think I would have died without that water. But the Rhine was just outside the wire. The guards sold us water through the wine and cigarettes. One cigarette would cost 900 marks. I saw thousands dying. They took the bodies away on trucks. At that date, the captain of Bad Kreuznach were being packed in more than 3 times the planned rate. Because the soil and the clothing were all dangerous, infected, and the people were already weak, to be constantly crowded near barbed wires was extremely dangerous. High rates of death by septicemia, blood poisoning, were reported in the camps. After about a month at Bad Kreuznach, where Heinz T had the impression that not many men died despite the conditions, he was given to the French along with 2 million others, according to the rumor. The rumor was not totally inaccurate. The French had originally asked Americans for as many as 1.7 million, but were negotiating now with 1.3 million captives to help repair war damage in France. Looking around, the famished men bloated with enema from their hunger, in rag clothes, dirty with gaunt faces and shuffling gait, Heinz thought a strangest sort of present to give the French. Then he was loaded on a train to go to Rennes in Brittany. One of the boys in the town of Rheinberg, 10-year-old Herbert Stethlen was allowed to take food to his father in the camp, 3 kilometers west of town. He passed the food through the barbed wire and the outer fence to his father sitting inside upon the perimeter road. Stethlen never saw anyone else at the camp on the same sort of errand. One of the captives wrapped a note around a rock which he flung out towards the road leading to Rheinberg. It was found by a Rheinberger who saved it. The note on brown wrapping paper, now turning dark, read, "Dear reader, please send us 2 comrades a package of cooked potatoes with salt. We are terribly hungry. We are waiting by the guard tower in the perimeter road. Please write on the package the name, Sergeant Jacob Lower, Camp E." 50-year-old sergeant with a PhD kept a diary in ink on toilet paper at Rheinsberg. He writes, Camp Rheinberg. I usually lie on the ground during the heat. I crawl into the earth hole. I wear a coat and boots with my forage cap pulled down over my ears. My field bag, in which I have a silver spoon and a fork, serves as my pillow. During a thunderstorm, one wall of my earth hole falls in on me. My coat and socks are wet through and through. During the night, I wander restlessly through the camp. I see the moon rise, listen to nightingales singing in the trees nearby, and I recite poems by Goethe. And in order not to fall asleep, I argue with myself about Nietzsche's life and theory. Fellow soldiers complain about being in prison. I advise them not to concentrate on the barbed wire, but instead to look through the space in between. I often sing the thoughts are free. Who can divine them? I especially rejoice in the verse about prisoners. In the evening, the people who like to sing German folk songs. Singing unites people. Protestant and Catholic prayers are held every evening, but their dogmatic narrowness doesn't satisfy me. I meditate on the topic, the technique of brain work. I imagine myself teaching students. Maybe I could write a book entitled The Workshop of an Intellectual Worker. At home, I could use literary sources. Here in the camp, I only possess my thoughts and depend on my memory, but mere book knowledge is worthless. You plan to write my own book of prayers. What I consider a value might mean something for others as well. I thank God that I am in this camp. Nowhere else would I have been so lost in my thoughts or seen humans in their total nakedness. Nor would I have ever had believed the victors to be captive of such cruelties. Rheinberg, May 19, 1945. Protestant evening prayers, dogmatic attitude. We have to be prepared to receive the Holy Spirit. 2 fingers on my left hand are inflamed. A young medical student put a bandage around my thumb. If they don't get better, I will be sent to the military hospital. Discussion with the young student about demoralization in the soldiers. My last will concerning my children, it will be their duty to preserve a strong and lively relationship to peasantry. All my ancestors have been peasants. My children should acquire land if possible and learn the tasks of a farmer to cultivate and live off the land. Those not qualified for studies at the university should become farmers. Thoughts about my dear wife. The Nazis, airmen, artillerymen, and tank corps leave the camp, probably for labor duties. Long discussion among the fellows about which fate is to be preferred, to starve in camp or work outside with the possibility occasionally getting more food. Some men, that is, try to escape from the camp. Some are caught, others get away. Few try. One told me we went on the tent over the barbed wire. Everything rattled. The guard fired at us. One ran ahead, another turned back in pursuit of the fugitives. A few put their hands up to the surrender. They were shot without mercy. I threw myself on the ground and played dead. The guard kicked me, but I didn't move. When he moved off, I squeezed under the wire back into the camp. The skate failed, but I'm still alive. I regret that I don't know more poems by heart. Meditation, God is love. Love is God. God is truth. Truth is God. God is kindness. Kindness is God. God is perfection. Perfection is God. God is of the east, possessed. God is ruler of the west, northland, southland, and east direction. This is from Goethe. Rest beneath his calm protection, the spirit of Goethe. Gert, a Holy Spirit keeps me alive. If I ever survive the camp, I will collect poems under the title Comfort and Praise. Today, I got 4 potatoes. What riches. I can't imagine life as a monk because poverty, purity, and obedience are easy to bear as long as I have enough free time to think. Thoughts are my passion. Rheinberg, May 20th, 1945. Protestant service in the morning, in the open, of course, dogmas, the soul shall reign over the body. I begin to understand Professor Jasper's point of view towards the church. According to him, the church's duty is to prepare the masses for the absolute, the eternal. Maybe he is right. That philosophy can only help a few people. How long will we have to be without shelter, without blankets or tents? Every German soldier once had shelter from the weather. Even a dog had a doghouse to crawl into when it rains. I only wish just finally, after 6 weeks, to get a roof over our heads. Even a salvage is better housed. Digenius, you at least had your barrel. Rheinberg, May 21st, 1945. Prayers have to be understood from the human psychological, not from the theological point of view. The mind needs to be the dominating principle. It has to start. It has started to rain again. Despair. At first, I seek shelter under the minuscule trees. I am drenched. I squeeze my back up and against a broken down wall that at least cuts off the wind and rain from one side. The next day, I get into a small cellar by climbing down a ladder. It's full of men. I doze for a couple of hours, feeling like a king. Then I must roam the field again like a common soldier. Rheinberg, May 22nd, 1945. Light rain stayed in earth hole, wet. The story of the cardboard. Our rations come into the camp in large cardboard cartons. Broken apart, they can serve as a kind of a bed. The cardboard, about 1 meter, 20 centimeters long in body width, provides good insulation against the damp ground. Every day, about 25 such beds are given out by the doctor to those who can prove they have no tent, blanket, or coat. Properly speaking, I was not really entitled to one because I still had a coat. At about 8 o'clock in the morning, on the morning of the first day that I tried to get one, there were over 25 men in line before me. Next morning, I got up about 6:30 before Revel. Luckily, I had my cardboard. Profoundly happy, I clutched it under my arm and lugged it to my hole. From then on, it was my prized possession. We are hand and glove together. Wolfgang Iff said that in his subsection of perhaps 10,000 people at Rheinberg, 30 to 40 bodies were dragged out every day. A member of the burial commandos, Iff was well placed to see what was going on. He got extra food so he could help drag the dead from his cage out of the gate of the camp, where they carried them in the wheelbarrows to several big steel garages. There, Iff and his team stripped the corpses of clothing, snapped off half the aluminum dog tags, spread the bodies in a layer of 15 to 20 through 10 shovelfuls of quick lime over them, put on more layers till they were stacked a meter high, placed the personnel possessions in a bag for the Americans, then left. Some of the corpses were dead of gangrene following frostbite suffered on the freezing nights of April. A dozen or more others, including a 14-year-old boy too weak to cling to the log flung across the ditch for a latrine, fell off and drowned. Some were dragged out. Dirt was thrown over some of them where they laid. Sometimes as many as 200 died each day. In other cages of a similar size, Iff saw about 60 to 7 per day going out. Then the trucks moved this, sad for what a Maccabee picture. Iff had said, the prisoners were never told what happened to the corpses. But German construction crews in the 50s and grave dealers in the 80s have discovered at Rheinberg human remains with German Army World War II aluminum dog tags jumbled closely together in common graves with no sign of a coffin or grave markers. Watches and jewelry taken from dead bodies were supplied to the vast black market in Germany, according to former Attorney General of the United States, Francis Bidler, Biddle. He visited the black market in Tiergarten section of Berlin, which he told his daughter was terrified. There were several thousand people bartering. Our mechanic sold his watch for $400 and 5 cartons of cigarettes for $100 a carton. Our guide yesterday told us that he made $8,000 selling watches and smuggled it back through their Secret Service man who was at the Potsdam conference and was going to buy a farm in Michigan with it. The watches apparently came off dead Germans. Part of the problem for a long time at Rheinberg was the crowding. One cage measuring roughly 300 meters by 300 meters was supposed to hold 10,000 people. But at the beginning, as many as 30,000 were forced in. This will leave about 3 square meters per person. Prisoner Thelin whispered to his son through the barbed wire that 330 to 770 people per day were dying. The camp then contained between 100 to 120,000 people. The clergy at Rheinsberg protested to the American camp commander, along with the Archbishop of Cologne, who it was rumored had also written directly to Pope Pius XII. The Pope, who had remained aloof from the situation of Hitler's death, camps continued his policy. How is it that the middle rank officers and doctors, seeing these things happen, show scarcely a flicker of interest or concern? Their impassioned description and statistic contrasts amazingly with the report. Protests, diaries of art of the prisoners with the pleas of the clergy, and the huge death counts enter under the category other losses. Yeah, folks, this is interesting. This is in the 1940s. This is in 1945, folks. What is it like now in 2020, 2022, 23, here we are at? Is that the way we are? I'm afraid we're even worse than that. Is it possible to get an idea of how this state of mind came about as we read the daily situation reports on discerning, articulate man who had been trained to save lives, Colonel C.H. Beasley, who with Colonel Mason wrote the chilling report of a Rhine camp in April, describes Rheinsberg on April 30th like this. This camp is well organized and is running smoothly. In the past 48 hours, there have been 7 deaths. At Singzi, there were 5 deaths allegedly due to exposure. The word allegedly is revealing. Reports came to Beasley from the camp commanders who had no interest in accusing themselves of committing atrocities. So why would Beasley use the word allegedly? He knew that the prisoners were not protected, as we see in his own description of them freezing in their sleep in their shirt sleeves in these same camps. So it is highly significant that he discredits the notion of death from exposure without specifically specifying why. He is not contradicting the report. He is refusing to join the accusation inherent in it. Beasley is calling exposure alleged only because he doesn't want to lend any credits to the accusation. Strangely, a few lines on it in his own report, he more or less confirms the charge of death by exposure, as he describes the old, infirm, unable to live under the conditions which they are exposed. 700 are in tents. At Singzi, there are also old, crippled, and infirm. Again, it is significant that Beasley reports a seemingly large number, 700 people under shelter, without saying that there were 90,000 more with no shelter at all. Running smoothly or well under control, as used by Beasley, usually meant only one thing, that DDT had been dusted of the prisoners in order to prevent an outbreak of typhus, which would threaten prisoners, guards in the whole of Germany. Beasley seemed to be avoiding, as far as he can, telling the truth about what he has seen, probably because he deplored it yet could not bring himself to write down accusations against the army. In that report, Beasley says he had ordered 1,600 blankets for the 9th Field Hospital at Linford, supporting the PWTE and Rheinberg, taking the U.S. Army surgeon at his word. One imagined a hospital at Linford which was taking in sick people from Rheinberg in a humane effort to save life, but there clearly was no proper hospital in Linford at that time for the camp commander on the 10th of May. After much persuasion, reluctantly permitted a small area within the camp to be set aside for a few tents for the sick. After numerous pleas, he permitted Mrs. Greta Swepsch, Mrs. Hert Brandt, and Father Borgerman to convert houses in Linford into a hospital, provided that it be staffed, funded, and run entirely by civilian Germans. Later, some medicines were delivered, possibly only DDT. Beasley, reporting what he heard on the telephone, perhaps did not know that many of the so-called U.S. Army hospitals were just dying grounds where terminal sick patients were hidden from the others and left to die without treatment, conveniently close to their graves. The pressure on Beasley to execute, euthanize, or cover up were immense. His brothers, officers in the medical corps who were doing a large-scale special surgery of death and disease in these same camps, reported that the deaths totaled only 11% of what they had actually found. Beasley could not be accurate, even if he wanted to be. The need to make a daily report, the long distance between the camps magnified by shattered roads, made it impossible for Beasley or anyone to inspect the camps every day. His report for April 30th covers more than 250,000 prisoners in 2 pages. All you had were phone calls from harassed camp commanders who themselves did not want to put a polished boot into the infected mud inside the cage. The very gates at Remagen were posted typhus fever, keep out on Beasley's telephone orders. Death rate for 2 days for Weinberg and Ramadan, cited by Beasley, is so far under the figures reported by the prisoners. The corrected ETO survey, the 12th Army Group, and by USFET, that is United States Forces European Theater, that they cannot be reconciled. Either Beasley is right or all the others are. Perhaps Beasley is beginning to break down here, give in to the cover-up which he cannot correct on his own. He would be tempted to take refuge in indifference because he must report what he knows cannot be true. Beasley is not responsible for these conditions. He's just trying to cope with them, but he is beginning to despair. The major cause of death, dysentery, he says, there must be proper mass sanitation. The standard deemed necessary with present supplies is impossible even to approach. But at this date, April 30th, he still obeys his training. He notes that he has filled out his requisition for medical supplies, which he apparently expects to be delivered to the camps, although they are a palliative, not a cure for the real physical causes, starvation, overcrowding, and exposure. It appears that Beasley soon realized that he was treating the symptoms, the camps, rather than the disease. Cruel indifference. Within a couple of weeks, Beasley is noting of his earlier hopeful blanket request for the Ninth Field Hospital. Cots, blankets, field ranges, and mess equipment needed badly for hospital service, PWTE. Quartermaster has been contacted and claims none of these are available. Beasley is changing before atrocity noted by others was alleged, and he now expects it himself. The word of the superior office who claimed nothing is available is openly doubted. It seems that Beasley is weary of the cynical indifference of high levels. Beasley did not protest, though, that is, perhaps because he could not believe the cause of what he saw happening. People who feel no ill will suddenly see it in others. This was the official title of the Army of Europe. It was commanded by Eisenhower. He was a common opponent to say SH, which was disbanded on July 14, 1945. So again, this was the United States forces that were in European theater. So that concludes chapter 4 tonight with other losses that took place in Germany after the war. You need to know the truth, folks. That's why I'm here. This happened long ago. This happened in 1945. This happened 15 years before I was even born. So this happened 77 years ago, you see. It must not be forgotten. It must not. And those who claim that there were 6 million Jews that passed away are truly liars. Because in reality, these wars are meant to destroy the white races of this world. It has nothing to do with the Jews, folks, except they're lying about everything they spew out of their mouths. You need to know that because they are truly the problem. They are the leeches upon all mankind. And they are seeking their new world order. It's very real. So at this point, I'm going to stop, and I appreciate you being here. If you find this important, I appreciate you would share this to others. The truth must be revealed. It must get out there. And that's why I'm sharing these things. I'm reading it simply as to give you an idea of what truly happened. And these James Bach, who did this, Canadian soldier, as far as I know, probably passed away. He wrote this book. This book was written probably in 1989. Very few Americans know this. They really think their army is really good. They really do think that we're doing good. And yet we attack. Our legacy as a country is not so clean, folks. It's not so clean. It's very pitiful. It's reality. As he talks about Beasley, is that there's no men without any hearts anymore. They don't feel anymore. They don't understand that we're all humans here, you see. And people are just trying to survive. But you can see that already starting to take place even in our country these days. So Thank you for listening. Have a good night and take care.